The banker's hands trembled as he pushed the foreclosure notice across the worn mahogany desk, and Nora Thompson felt her entire world crumble into dust as she stared at the number written in black ink. $300, due in 30 days, or lose everything her father had built. She pressed her calloused fingertips against the edge of the desk to steady herself, watching Mr. Harrison's thin lips move as he explained the mathematics of her ruin, though his words sounded distant and hollow like echoes in a canyon. The afternoon sun streaming through the window of First National Bank of Platteville highlighted every crack in the leather ledger, every scratch on the desk surface, every wrinkle around the banker's cold gray eyes that held not a trace of sympathy for the 23-year-old woman who stood before him in a faded calico dress that had seen better days. "Your father took out this loan 3 years ago, Miss Thompson," Mr. Harrison said, his voice clipped and professional. "The terms were quite clear. With his passing 6 months ago, the debt falls to you as his sole heir." Nora's throat tightened. She had known about the loan, had watched her father, Jacob Thompson, worry over it during his final illness, had seen the way it carved lines into his weathered face deeper than any plow ever cut into Colorado soil. But she had believed, foolishly perhaps, that she could manage it. That between the small ranch north of Platteville and the vegetable garden she tended with such care, she could scrape together enough to make the payments. The drought this summer of 1882 had proven her wrong. "I understand the terms, Mr. Harrison," she said quietly, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I am asking for an extension, just until after the fall harvest. The autumn rains will come and I can sell the wheat then." The banker shook his head, already closing the ledger as if her fate were sealed and not worth another moment of his valuable time. "The bank has been more than generous, Miss Thompson. You have 30 days, not 1 day more." She took the foreclosure notice with fingers that felt numb, folded it carefully, and tucked it into the pocket of her dress. The weight of it seemed to pull her down as she walked out of the bank into the bright June afternoon. Platteville's Main Street bustled with the usual activity: ranchers loading supplies onto wagons, children chasing a dog between the buildings, women in their Sunday dresses despite it being a Thursday, heading toward the general store. Everything looked exactly as it had when she entered the bank 20 minutes ago, but Nora felt as though she were seeing it all through a veil, separated from the ordinary flow of life by the knowledge that in 30 days she would have nothing. She untied her mare, Daisy, from the hitching post and stood for a moment with her forehead pressed against the horse's warm neck, gathering the strength to ride home and face the empty house that still smelled faintly of her father's pipe tobacco. "Miss Thompson." The voice was unfamiliar, deep and rough like gravel, yet somehow gentle. Nora lifted her head and found herself looking up at a tall man she had never seen before. He stood perhaps 6 feet 2 inches, broad-shouldered beneath a dusty work shirt, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly where it touched his collar. His eyes were a striking shade of blue-gray, like storm clouds over the mountains, and they regarded her with an expression she could not quite read. "Yes," she straightened, suddenly aware that her own eyes were damp with unshed tears. "Name's Jesse Dalton," he said, touching the brim of his worn hat in greeting. "I could not help but overhear your conversation with the banker. These walls are thinner than they ought to be." Heat rose in Nora's cheeks, a mixture of embarrassment and indignation. "Then you should not have listened." "You are right, and I apologize for that," Jesse said, and she could hear genuine regret in his voice. "But now that I have heard, I find I cannot walk away without offering to help." Nora studied him more carefully. His clothes were dusty from travel, his boots scuffed and well worn, but everything about him spoke of capability and strength. A working man, she judged, probably a ranch hand or cowboy passing through town. Certainly not someone with $300 to spare. "That is kind of you, Mr. Dalton, but I doubt there is anything you can do," she said, preparing to mount Daisy. "I have the money." The words stopped her cold. She turned slowly to face him again, searching his expression for signs of mockery or cruelty, but found only earnestness. "I do not understand," she said carefully. "You are offering to loan me $300. I should tell you honestly that I have no idea when I could repay such a sum." Jesse shook his head, reaching into the inner pocket of his vest. He withdrew a folded packet of bills that made Nora's eyes widen. She had never seen so much money in one place. "Not a loan," he said. "A payment." Now she was truly confused. "A payment for what? I have nothing to sell." "Your hand in marriage." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Nora grabbed Daisy's saddle to steady herself, certain she had misheard. "Excuse me." Jesse's weather-beaten face colored slightly, but his gaze remained direct. "I know how it sounds, Miss Thompson. I am not a madman, though I realize my words might suggest otherwise. Let me explain myself properly. May I walk with you somewhere we might talk more privately?" She should have said no. Every ounce of common sense screamed at her to mount her horse and ride away from this strange man with his stranger proposition. But desperation makes people do foolish things, and Nora found herself nodding. They walked down the street together, leading Daisy behind them, until they reached the small park at the edge of town where a few cottonwood trees provided shade. Jesse waited until they were seated on a bench, a respectful distance between them, before he spoke again. "I am 30 years old," he began, "and I have spent the last 12 years working ranches from Texas to Montana. I am good at what I do. Saved my wages, invested wisely in cattle, sold them for profit. I have built up a decent stake, enough to buy land and start my own spread. I purchased a section of land about 5 miles north of here 2 months ago. Good grazing, a creek that runs year-round, timber for building. Everything a man needs to build a life." He paused, looking out at the mountains in the distance. "Everything except someone to share it with. I have spent too many years drifting, Miss Thompson. I am tired of bunkhouses and temporary arrangements. I want a home, a real home, a wife. Children someday, if God wills it." Nora listened, her heart beating hard against her ribs. "There are many women who would be happy to marry a man of means, Mr. Dalton. Why approach a stranger with debts she cannot pay?" Jesse turned to look at her directly, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Because in the 3 minutes I watched you in that bank, I saw more courage and dignity than I have seen in most people in my entire life. You did not beg or weep or rage at the injustice. You stood straight, spoke clearly, and walked out with your head high even though your world was falling apart. That tells me what kind of woman you are. Strong, proud, honest. Those are qualities worth more than gold to a man looking for a partner in this hard country." "You know nothing about me," Nora protested, though her voice came out softer than she intended. "I know you are your father's daughter, and Jacob Thompson had a reputation as an honest, hard-working man. I know you have been running that ranch alone since he died, which means you are not afraid of hard work. I know you came to town in a mended dress, but with clean hands and neatly braided hair, which tells me you have self-respect, even in poverty. And I know you are here trying to save your father's legacy rather than simply walking away from an impossible debt. That tells me you are loyal and determined." Nora felt tears threatening again and blinked them back fiercely. "This is insane. People do not marry strangers." "They did it all the time back east," Jesse said. "Mail-order brides, arranged marriages. This is not so different except we have the advantage of meeting face to face before deciding. You have decided, Nora pointed out. "I have not." "Fair enough." Jessie pulled out the foreclosure notice she had placed in her pocket, and she realized with a start that he must have taken it while they walked, smooth as a card sharp. Before she could protest, he tore the paper cleanly in half, then in quarters, then into pieces too small to read. "There. The debt is gone. Now you can make your decision freely, without desperation forcing your hand." "What did you just do?" Nora's voice rose in panic. "That was the only proof I had of the terms, the only record of what I owe." Jessie smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something surprisingly warm. "Exactly. I am going back into that bank, and I am going to pay your debt in full, no strings attached. If you choose to marry me after that, it will be because you want to, not because you have no other choice. And if you choose not to marry me, then you will still have your ranch free and clear, and I will wish you well and never trouble you again." He stood up, dusting off his trousers. "I will be at the hotel tonight if you want to talk more. The Platteville house, room 12. Think about it, Miss Thompson. Not just about the money, but about what I am really offering. A partnership. A chance to build something good together. Two people working toward the same goals, facing this hard world as allies instead of alone." Before she could form a response, he touched his hat brim again and walked away with long, purposeful strides back toward the bank. Nora sat frozen on the bench, her mind reeling, watching him disappear around the corner. When she finally rode home an hour later, she carried with her a receipt showing that the loan on the Thompson ranch had been paid in full, along with a brief note in strong, slanted handwriting. "The offer stands, but the choice is yours. Jessie Dalton." The ranch looked different somehow as she approached it in the fading afternoon light. The small house her father had built with his own hands, the barn that leaned slightly to the left, the chicken coop, and the corral where her 3 remaining horses grazed. She had been seeing it all through the lens of impending loss for so long that viewing it now as truly hers, secured and safe, made everything appear almost new. Inside, she lit the lamp and read Jessie's note a dozen times, searching for hidden meanings or signs of deception. But the words remained simple and direct, just like the man himself seemed to be. She barely slept that night, her mind spinning with possibilities and fears. Jessie Dalton was a stranger. She knew nothing of his character beyond those few minutes of conversation and the extraordinary gesture he had made. He could be cruel. He could be dishonest despite his honest face. He could be any number of terrible things hiding behind good manners and a generous act. But he could also be exactly what he appeared, a lonely man seeking companionship, offering a fair exchange. Her hand in marriage for financial security, partnership for partnership, loneliness for loneliness. By morning, Nora had made her decision. She dressed in her best clothes, a green cotton dress that brought out the color of her hazel eyes, braided her long brown hair and pinned it up in a style her mother had taught her years ago before the fever took her. She rode into Platteville with her spine straight and her chin up, the way her father had taught her to face both good fortune and bad. The clerk at the Platteville house directed her to room 12 on the 2nd floor. She climbed the stairs slowly, giving herself time to reconsider, but her resolve held firm. She knocked 3 times, sharp and clear. Jessie opened the door in his shirt sleeves, suspenders hanging loose, clearly in the middle of shaving based on the soap still on half his face. His eyes widened in surprise when he saw her. "Miss Thompson, I did not expect you so early. Please, give me just a moment to make myself presentable." "That is not necessary," Nora said, though she appreciated his consideration. "We need to talk, Mr. Dalton, and I would prefer to do so plainly, without pretense or formality." He gestured her inside, leaving the door open for propriety's sake. The room was simple but clean, his few possessions neatly arranged. A man of order and discipline, she noted. "I have considered your proposal," Nora said without preamble, "and I have questions before I give you my answer." Jesse wiped the remaining soap from his face with a towel and sat down in the room's single chair, leaving the bed for her to sit on. She remained standing. "Ask whatever you need to know," he said. "Why have you never married before? 30 is not so old, but it is past the age when most men settle down." "Fair question." Jesse leaned back, considering. "I was engaged once when I was 22. Girl named Sarah back in Texas. Sweet thing, daughter of the ranch owner I worked for. We were planning a wedding when she met a banker from Houston who could offer her a fine house and a place in society. She broke it off. I was angry for a while, but eventually I realized she made the right choice. She wanted comfort and security, and I was just a cowboy with more dreams than dollars. It taught me to focus on building something real before I went courting again." The honesty in his voice convinced Nora more than pretty words would have. "What would you expect of me as your wife?" Jesse met her eyes steadily. "Partnership, like I said. I can handle the heavy work, the cattle, the building that needs doing. But I would value your judgment on decisions, your help with planning and managing the household. I would expect you to pull your weight, because that is who you are, and I would not insult you by suggesting otherwise. In return, I would work hard to provide well, to treat you with respect, and to be faithful. I do not drink to excess, I do not gamble, and I do not raise my hand to women or children." "What about affection?" The question came out more quietly. "I will not lie to you, Mr. Dalton. I had hoped when I eventually married that it would be for love." Something shifted in Jesse's expression, a gentleness that surprised her. "I cannot promise you love today, Miss Thompson. I will not lie to you either, but I can promise you that I will treat you with kindness and consideration. I can promise that I will work every day to earn your regard and affection. And I can promise that I will give you time to come to know me before expecting you to share my bed. We will marry if you agree, but we will court after the wedding instead of before. Fair enough." Nora felt a knot of tension she had not realized she was carrying loosened slightly. "And if I never come to love you, then we will still be partners and allies," Jesse said. "That is more than many married couples have. But I hope, Miss Thompson, that you will give us both a fair chance to see what might grow between us." She walked to the window and looked out at the street below, at the ordinary people going about their ordinary lives. "I want to keep my ranch. Not sell it, not combine it with yours, but keep it as mine. I would work both properties, yours and mine, but I want to know that I have something that belongs to me alone." "Agreed," Jesse said immediately. "It is your father's legacy. I would never ask you to give that up. And I want your word that if there are children, they will be raised to know both properties, to understand that their mother is an equal partner in building our family's future. You have my word on that, and I will put it in writing if you like." Nora turned to face him, her heart pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "Then yes, Mr. Dalton, I will marry you." Jesse stood slowly as if sudden movement might shatter the moment. "You are certain?" "I am certain that you are offering me more honesty and respect than many women receive from men they have known for years," Nora said. "I am certain that you have shown yourself to be generous and honorable. I am certain that remaining alone is no longer appealing when there is a chance for something better. So yes, I am certain enough." He crossed the room and extended his hand. She took it, feeling the calluses that matched her own, the strength in his grip tempered by obvious care not to hurt her. They stood like that for a moment, two strangers shaking hands on a deal that would bind their lives together. "We should speak to Reverend Matthews today," Jesse said. See when he can perform the ceremony. Is a week enough time for you to prepare?" "I do not need anything fancy," Nora replied. "A simple ceremony will do. Nevertheless, you should have a nice dress if you want one, and we should do this properly. I may be rushing you into marriage, but I will not deny you the dignity of a real wedding." His thoughtfulness touched her more than she expected. 3 days, then. That will give me time to settle affairs at the ranch and make arrangements. They found Reverend Matthews at the church, and the kindly old minister listened to their request with raised eyebrows but no judgment. He had married stranger couples under stranger circumstances in his 40 years of ministry. "Saturday afternoon, then," he agreed. 2 o'clock at the church. I assume you will want witnesses. Shall I arrange for some of the congregation to attend?" "That would be appreciated," Jessie said, then glanced at Nora. "Unless you have family or friends you want to invite," Nora shook her head. Her father's few friends had drifted away after his death, uncomfortable around a young woman living alone, and her only living relative was an aunt in Kansas, who she had not seen in 10 years. "No, whoever Reverend Matthews suggests will be fine." The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity. Jessie insisted on buying her a dress from the general store, a beautiful soft blue fabric that Mrs. Henderson, the shopkeeper, made up into a simple but elegant gown. He also purchased a gold wedding band, plain but well made, that fit Nora's finger perfectly. Nora spent her time preparing the ranch for her absence. She arranged for young Tommy Wilson from the neighboring spread to look after her animals while she moved her immediate necessities to Jessie's land. She packed her mother's few precious belongings, her father's watch, and the family Bible with the careful record of births and deaths going back 3 generations. On Friday evening, Jessie came to the ranch to help her load her things into a wagon. He moved through her home with respect, treating her belongings carefully, asking before touching anything that seemed personal or precious. Together they worked until dusk, and then Jessie made a simple dinner of beans and cornbread while Nora sat at her father's old table and watched this man who would be her husband move comfortably around her kitchen. "You cook well," she observed as he set a plate before her. "Had to learn," Jessie said with a slight smile. "Bunkhouse food will keep you alive, but it is not much for flavor. I got tired of being hungry and eating at the same time, if you know what I mean." Nora laughed, and the sound surprised her. She could not remember the last time she had laughed. Jessie's eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, she noticed. It made him look younger, less weathered by the hard years. They ate in companionable silence, and when Jessie prepared to leave for the night, he paused at the door. "Are you afraid," he asked quietly, "of tomorrow?" Nora considered the question honestly. "A little, but less than I was 3 days ago. You have been nothing but kind and respectful, Mr. Dalton. That gives me hope." "Jessie," he corrected gently. "If we are to be married tomorrow, you should call me Jessie." "Jessie," she repeated, testing the name. "And you should call me Nora." "Nora." He said her name like a promise. "Sleep well. Tomorrow we start our life together." Saturday dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect June day that makes Colorado seem like paradise. Nora dressed carefully in her new blue gown, pinned her hair up with the silver combs that had been her mother's, and looked at herself in the small mirror. The woman who looked back seemed both familiar and strange, poised on the edge of a transformation she could not quite imagine. Mrs. Henderson arrived with her daughter Susan to help Nora with final preparations and to accompany her to the church. The older woman fussed over Nora's hair and dress with maternal attention that made Nora's eyes sting with bittersweet emotion. "You are a beautiful bride," Mrs. Henderson declared. "That Jesse Dalton is a lucky man." The church was small but filled with friendly faces when they arrived. Reverend Matthews stood at the altar in his best robes, and beside him waited Jesse, transformed by a new suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. He had trimmed his hair and shaved carefully, and when he turned to watch Nora walk down the aisle, the expression on his face took her breath away. Wonder, hope, and something that might have been the beginning of devotion all mixed together in those blue-gray eyes. Nora's hands trembled as she took her place beside him. Jesse reached out and steadied her with a gentle touch to her elbow, a small gesture that somehow conveyed reassurance and solidarity. Reverend Matthews began the ceremony with traditional words that had joined countless couples before them. Nora heard herself repeat the vows, her voice stronger than she expected, promising to honor and cherish this man she barely knew. Jesse's voice was deep and sure as he made the same promises to her, and when he slipped the gold band onto her finger, his hands were steady even though she could see the pulse beating fast at his throat. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Matthews declared. "Jesse, you may kiss your bride." Jesse leaned down slowly, giving Nora time to pull away if she chose. She did not. His lips brushed hers gently, briefly, a promise of patience rather than a demand. When he pulled back, she saw that his eyes were bright with emotion. The small congregation clapped and offered congratulations. Mrs. Henderson had organized a simple reception in the church hall with cake and lemonade. For an hour, Nora and Jesse stood side by side, accepting good wishes from near strangers who treated them with the warmth that small communities extend to newlyweds. It felt surreal and wonderful and terrifying all at once. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Jesse brought the wagon around and helped Nora up to the seat. Her belongings were already loaded in the back along with supplies for their journey to his land. Their land now, she supposed. Their shared future. The ride took just under 2 hours, following the trail north out of Platteville into rolling grassland that gradually gave way to more rugged terrain. Jesse pointed out landmarks as they went, the old lightning-struck tree that marked the boundary of his property, the creek that he had mentioned before, silver in the late afternoon sun, and finally, the homestead itself. It was more substantial than Nora had expected. A solid cabin built of logs with a stone chimney, a barn that looked new and well constructed, and a corral that held a dozen horses. Everything showed signs of recent work and careful planning. "I have been living in the barn," Jesse explained as he helped her down from the wagon. "I wanted the cabin finished properly before bringing a wife here. There is a bedroom and a main room with the kitchen and eating area. Not fancy, but sound and weatherproof." He carried her bags inside and Nora followed, taking in her new home. The main room was indeed simple but showed evidence of care. A good cast iron stove, a solid table with 4 chairs, shelves built into the walls. Through an open door she could see the bedroom with a large bed covered in a colorful quilt. "I bought the quilt from a woman in Denver," Jesse said, following her gaze. "Thought it would brighten things up. And before you worry, I will be sleeping in the barn like I said. That bed is yours until you decide otherwise." Nora turned to face him, this man who was now her husband, and felt a rush of gratitude for his continued consideration. "Thank you, Jesse, for all of this, for your patience." He smiled that warm smile that transformed his face. "We are partners now, Nora." Partners are patient with each other while they learn to work together. They spent the evening unloading the wagon and settling Nora's things into the cabin. Jesse proved to be helpful without being overbearing, asking where she wanted items placed and deferring to her judgment on how to organize the kitchen. As darkness fell, he showed her around the property by lantern light, introducing her to the horses, pointing out the spring house where they could keep milk and butter cool, explaining his plans for expanding the barn and eventually building a bunkhouse when they could afford to hire help. "We will need to drive cattle in the spring," he said. "I have money set aside to buy good breeding stock that will build us a solid herd over time, but that is months away. For now, we focus on preparing for winter. There is a vegetable garden plot behind the cabin that needs planting, hay to cut and store, firewood to chop and stack." "I can help with all of that," Nora assured him. "I am not afraid of work." "I know you are not." Jesse's voice held unmistakable respect. "That is one of the many reasons I am glad you agreed to marry me." When they finally said goodnight, Jesse took his bedroll and headed to the barn while Nora prepared for bed in the cabin. She lay awake for a long time in the big bed under the beautiful quilt, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of this new place, trying to absorb the reality that she was now Nora Dalton, wife to a man she had known for less than a week. But as she drifted toward sleep, she felt something unexpected: hope. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Nora and Jesse worked together from dawn until dusk, accomplishing an astonishing amount through their combined effort. They plowed and planted the garden, Jesse handling the heavy work of breaking ground while Nora followed behind with seeds and careful hands. They repaired the corral fence where winter had damaged it, Nora holding posts steady while Jesse drove them deep into the earth. They rode out to survey the full extent of the property, and Jesse showed her the place where he planned to build their permanent house someday, a spot where the creek curved around a stand of cottonwoods, and the view stretched for miles across the grassland toward the mountains. "This is where I knew I wanted to settle," he told her as they sat on their horses side by side. "Something about this spot just felt right, like home before there was even a home here." Nora understood. She felt it too, that sense of rightness, of possibility. "It is beautiful. It will be even better when we build a proper house here, something big enough for a family. Bedrooms for children, a real parlor, maybe even a library if you want. I noticed you have quite a few books." The casual mention of children made Nora's heart skip, but Jesse's tone was matter-of-fact, as if discussing fence posts or cattle breeds. Planning for a future together, not making demands. They fell into the habit of taking their meals together at the cabin, Jesse coming in from whatever work he was doing to eat the food Nora prepared. She was a good cook, better than Jesse with his bunkhouse training, and she took satisfaction in watching him enjoy her biscuits, her stews, her pies made from dried apples. He always thanked her, always offered to help clean up, always treated her contributions as valuable. In the evenings, they sat together on the porch that Jesse had built across the front of the cabin, talking as the sun set and the stars emerged. They told each other stories from their pasts, Jesse describing his years of wandering and the characters he had met, Nora sharing memories of her parents and the ranch where she had grown up. They discovered shared opinions on everything from politics to poetry, found unexpected common ground in their love of horses and thunderstorms, and the smell of coffee in the morning. "Tell me something you have never told anyone," Jesse said one evening about 2 weeks into their marriage. Nora thought about it, watching the first stars appear. "Sometimes I talk to my father, out loud when I am alone. I tell him about my day, ask his advice. I know it is foolish since he cannot answer, but it comforts me." "That is not foolish at all," Jesse said quietly. "I do the same with my brother." "I did not know you had a brother." "Had," past tense. Jesse's voice went soft and distant. "Daniel, 2 years younger than me. We worked ranches together for several years. He was killed in a stampede in Wyoming 5 years ago now. Sometimes I still turn to tell him something before I remember he is not there." Nora reached out without thinking and took Jesse's hand. He startled slightly at the contact, but then his fingers curled around hers, warm and strong. "I am sorry," she said. "That must have been terrible." It was. Still is some days. He looked down at their joined hands. "But it taught me that life is short and uncertain, that we should not wait for perfect circumstances to build the life we want. That is part of why I approached you the way I did. Time is precious. Why waste it?" They sat in silence for a while, hands clasped, watching the night deepen around them. When they finally rose to go to their separate beds, Jesse lifted her hand briefly to his lips in a gesture that was both courtly and tender. "Thank you for listening, Nora. And for sharing your own truth with me. We are partners." Nora echoed his own words back to him. Partners trust each other with their truths. As summer progressed, the partnership deepened into something that felt increasingly like friendship. They worked in comfortable rhythm, anticipating each other's needs without words. Jesse learned that Nora liked her coffee strong and black, that she hated mending but would do it meticulously when needed, that she had a surprisingly bawdy sense of humor that emerged when she was relaxed and happy. Nora learned that Jesse was an early riser who liked to watch the sunrise, that he had a beautiful singing voice he only used when he thought no one was listening, that he was unfailingly gentle with animals and children. They also learned to navigate the physical awareness that hung between them, growing stronger as the weeks passed. Nora found herself noticing the way Jesse's shirt pulled across his shoulders when he worked, the graceful strength of his hands, the sound of his laughter. She caught him watching her sometimes with an intensity that made her skin warm and her breath catch. One particularly hot July afternoon, Jesse was working shirtless to repair the barn roof while Nora tended the garden below. She looked up to ask him a question and forgot entirely what she had meant to say, arrested by the sight of him outlined against the blue sky, muscles moving under sun-bronzed skin as he hammered shingles into place. He glanced down and caught her staring, and something electric passed between them, a mutual acknowledgement of desire that neither was quite ready to act on. That night on the porch, the air felt charged with all the things they were not saying. "Nora," Jesse finally began, his voice rough, "I want you to know that I am not made of stone. These weeks with you have been wonderful, getting to know you, building this partnership. But I would be lying if I said I did not want more. That I do not think about kissing you properly, about holding you, about being truly your husband in every way." Nora's heart hammered against her ribs. "I think about it too," she admitted quietly, "but I am also afraid, not of you," she added quickly, "but of the vulnerability. Of giving myself to someone completely." "I understand." Jesse reached for her hand and she let him take it. "And I will not rush you, but Nora, I need you to know something else. This is not just physical desire speaking. Over these weeks, I have come to care for you deeply. Your wit, your strength, your kindness, the way you sing while you cook, the way you talk to the horses, the way you look at the stars like they are old friends. I am falling in love with you, and I wanted you to know that before anything else happens between us." Nora felt tears spring to her eyes. "Jesse, you do not have to say anything back," he interrupted gently. "I am not asking for declarations. I just wanted you to know where my heart is heading so that when you are ready, you will know that it is not just passion but something deeper." She stood abruptly, pulling him up with her. "Stop talking," she said, and before she could overthink it, she kissed him. This was nothing like the chaste brush of lips at their wedding. This was heat and need and weeks of growing desire finally unleashed. Jesse made a surprised sound against her mouth, and then his arms came around her, pulling her close as he kissed her back with a passion that made her dizzy. His hands were in her hair, hers clutched at his shoulders, and the world narrowed to just them. just the overwhelming rightness of being held by him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jesse rested his forehead against hers. "Nora," he whispered, her name a prayer and a question. "I am ready," she whispered back. "I want this. I want you." He swept her up into his arms, cradling her against his chest as he carried her into the cabin and through to the bedroom. He laid her carefully on the quilt and then paused, looking down at her with such tenderness that fresh tears sprang to her eyes. "Are you certain?" he asked. "We can wait longer if you need to." "I am certain," she said, reaching up to cup his face with her hand. "I am falling in love with you too, Jesse Dalton. I think I have been since you tore up that foreclosure notice, maybe even since you first spoke to me outside the bank, and I do not want to wait any more." He joined her on the bed, kissing her slowly and thoroughly, taking his time to explore and cherish. They undressed each other with eager but careful hands, marveling at revealed skin, mapping new territory with touches that ranged from gentle to urgent. Jesse was patient and attentive, making sure of her pleasure before seeking his own, and when they finally joined together fully, Nora felt something slot into place in her heart, a sense of completion she had not known she was missing. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, Jesse's fingers trailing lazy patterns on her skin while she rested her head on his chest and listened to his heartbeat slow. "No more sleeping in the barn," she murmured, and felt his chest shake with quiet laughter. "No more sleeping in the barn," he agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Though I will likely have to build an addition to the cabin soon to store all my things properly." "We will build it together," Nora said, "like we build everything else." From that night forward, their marriage transformed into something that felt as natural as breathing. They worked their land together during the day and fell into each other's arms at night, the passion between them matched by deepening emotional intimacy. They talked about everything and nothing, shared dreams and fears, built plans for their future one conversation at a time. In August, they made the journey to Nora's ranch to check on things and to begin the process of truly integrating the two properties. Tommy Wilson had done a good job maintaining the place, and Nora walked through her childhood home with Jesse at her side, showing him the marks on the doorframe where her father had measured her height each birthday, the place in the barn where her mother's favorite cat had nested and raised kittens, the view from the porch where she had sat countless evenings. "We could rent this house to a family who needs it," Jesse suggested. "Keep the land for grazing but let someone else benefit from the buildings. Maybe a young couple starting out, or a widow with children who needs a safe place." Nora loved him more for the suggestion, for understanding that her legacy could be about helping others the way they had been helped. "That is a perfect idea." They found just such a family within a week, the Hendersons' nephew and his wife with a baby on the way, and worked out an arrangement that gave the young family affordable housing in exchange for helping maintain both properties. It eased Nora's conscience about leaving her father's ranch empty and provided them with reliable assistance. As fall approached, Jesse began acquiring cattle, carefully selecting breeding stock that would form the foundation of their herd. Nora rode with him to neighboring ranches and to the stockyards in Greeley, learning to evaluate animals with the same careful eye Jesse had developed over his years of experience. She had a good instinct for it, he told her with pride, and her opinions carried equal weight with his in their decisions. "We make a good team," he said as they drove a small herd of prime heifers back to their ranch one September afternoon. "We do," Nora agreed, watching the cattle move ahead of them with satisfaction. "In all ways." Jesse gave her a look that promised thorough demonstration of his agreement later, and Nora laughed, feeling happier than she had ever imagined possible. But life, as Nora had learned early, has a way of testing happiness. In October, a rider came to their ranch with news that Mr. Harrison at the bank had been asking questions about the $300 payment Jesse had made back in June. Apparently an audit had revealed some irregularity, though the rider could not say exactly what, and the banker wanted to speak with Jesse in person. "This is probably nothing," Jesse assured Nora as they rode into Platteville together the next day. "Likely just a paperwork issue that needs clarifying." But Nora felt uneasy. Mr. Harrison had always struck her as a petty man, the sort who would resent Jesse's grand gesture in paying off her debt. She held Jesse's hand tightly as they entered the bank. Mr. Harrison looked up from his desk with an expression that confirmed Nora's fears. This was not friendly concern. This was trouble. "Mr. Dalton, Mrs. Dalton," he said, his voice coldly formal. "Thank you for coming. We have a problem regarding the payment you made in June." "What sort of problem?" Jesse asked calmly, though Nora could feel tension in the hand that still held hers. "The problem," Mr. Harrison said, opening his ledger with dramatic flair, "is that the debt in question was owed by Miss Nora Thompson. You paid a debt that was not yours to pay. Furthermore, you did so under suspicious circumstances, following immediately after a private conversation with Miss Thompson outside the bank. It has been suggested that you may have had improper motivations." "Improper motivations?" Jesse's voice took on an edge. "I paid a debt for the woman I intended to marry. We were married 3 days later. What exactly are you implying?" Mr. Harrison's thin lips curved in something that was not quite a smile. "I am implying nothing. I am stating facts. You paid another person's debt under circumstances that could be construed as untoward. Some might say you were attempting to purchase a wife, which certain moral elements in this community find objectionable." Nora felt rage bloom hot in her chest. "Certain moral elements meaning you, Mr. Harrison. Are you so bitter that someone saved my ranch from foreclosure that you would manufacture scandal out of kindness?" "I manufacture nothing, Mrs. Dalton. I simply enforce banking regulations, and the regulation is clear. The debt belonged to you." Mr. Dalton's payment, while accepted at the time, should not have been processed without proper authorization from the debtor herself. "This is ridiculous," Jesse said flatly. "Debts are transferred and paid by third parties all the time. This is a transparent attempt to create trouble where none exists." "Perhaps." Mr. Harrison folded his hands on the desk. "But the fact remains that there is now some question about whether the debt was properly satisfied. Unless we can resolve this matter, I may be forced to reinstate the original loan." "You cannot do that," Nora said, her voice shaking with anger. "The debt was paid in full. You accepted the payment. You cannot simply change your mind months later." "I can if the payment was made irregularly." Mr. Harrison's eyes glittered with malicious satisfaction. "However, I am willing to overlook these irregularities if Mr. Dalton can provide proof of his financial standing. A man who throws around $300 must have considerable resources. I would simply like to verify that those resources were obtained legally." Understanding dawned cold and clear. This was not about banking regulations or propriety. This was extortion, or something close to it. Mr. Harrison wanted leverage, wanted power over them, wanted to punish them for the crime of succeeding where he had expected them to fail. Jesse's jaw tightened, and Nora saw him struggle to control his temper. "My finances are my own business, Mr. Harrison. They are certainly not yours. If you have genuine concerns about the payment, I suggest you take them to a judge. Otherwise, I consider this matter closed." He stood, pulling Nora up with him. "We are leaving. If you have further concerns, you can communicate them through a lawyer." They walked out of the bank with heads high, but once outside, Jesse's facade cracked. That miserable little tyrant. I should have known this would not be simple. What are we going to do? Nora asked. Can he really reinstate the debt? I do not know, Jesse admitted. I need to talk to a lawyer, find out what our legal standing is. But Nora, I promise you, I will not let him take your ranch. I will not let him win. They found a lawyer in Greeley, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Reed who listened to their story with increasing indignation. Mr. Harrison is on shaky legal ground, she told them. Very shaky. But he is also a banker with connections and influence. If he wants to make trouble for you, he can, even if he would ultimately lose in court. Legal battles are expensive and time-consuming. What do you suggest? Jesse asked. Mrs. Reed leaned back in her chair, thinking. I suggest we go on the offensive. File a complaint against Mr. Harrison with the Territorial Banking Commission for harassment and improper business practices. Make it clear that any attempt to reinstate a properly satisfied debt will be met with legal consequences and public scandal. Men like Harrison are bullies. They fold when confronted with real opposition. Hope sparked in Nora's chest. You think that will work? I think it will work better than simply waiting for him to make his next move, Mrs. Reed said. Give me a few days to prepare the paperwork. In the meantime, gather any documentation you have regarding the original loan and payment. Letters, receipts, anything that shows the transaction was legitimate and above board. They rode home with renewed determination. That evening, they went through all of Nora's father's papers, finding the original loan agreement, the payment records, every scrap of documentation related to the debt. Jesse added his own financial records, bank statements showing the steady accumulation of his savings over years of hard work, the bill of sale for his land, everything that proved he was exactly what he claimed to be, an honest man who had earned his money through legitimate means. Mrs. Reed proved to be as competent as her confidence suggested. Within 2 weeks, she had filed a formal complaint against Mr. Harrison and sent a sharply worded letter to the bank's board of directors questioning their employees' conduct. The response was swift. The board, eager to avoid scandal and regulatory scrutiny, issued a statement confirming that the Thompson debt had been properly satisfied and that there would be no attempt to reinstate it. Mr. Harrison, they noted, had acted without authorization in suggesting otherwise and had been counseled on proper procedures. It was as close to an apology as they were likely to get, but it was enough. The matter was settled, the ranch secured once and for all. We should celebrate, Jesse declared when they received the news. Properly celebrate, not just breathe a sigh of relief. He organized a party at their ranch, inviting their neighbors and the few friends they had made in the area. Nora cooked for days in preparation, baking pies and cakes, roasting a pig that Jesse had traded for with a farmer south of Platteville. On a perfect October evening with the cottonwoods blazing gold in the fading light, they welcomed a dozen families to their home, sharing food and music and laughter under the stars. Tommy Wilson brought his fiddle and played lively tunes that had everyone dancing. Jesse proved to be a surprisingly good dancer, spinning Nora around their makeshift dance floor with confident grace. She laughed until her sides ached, her earlier fears forgotten in the joy of the moment. Later, when most of the guests had gone home and only a few remained sitting around the fire, Mrs. Henderson pulled Nora aside. I wanted to tell you how happy I am for you, dear, the older woman said, patting Nora's hand. When I saw you that day before your wedding, I worried. It all seemed so sudden, so strange. But seeing you two together now, it is clear that you have found something real. Love is not always a lightning bolt. Sometimes it grows slowly, built on respect and partnership. What you and Jessie have is strong and it will last. Nora hugged her impulsively. Thank you. That means more than you know. As winter approached, Nora began to suspect that their family might grow sooner than expected. She missed her monthly courses in November and then again in December. She felt different, though she could not quite articulate how, just a subtle shift in her body's rhythms and responses. She said nothing to Jessie at first, waiting to be certain, but he noticed anyway. "Are you well?" he asked one morning when she declined breakfast, feeling queasy. "You have seemed tired lately." "I am well," she assured him. "Just very well indeed, I think." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by wonder. "Nora, are you saying—" "I think we are going to have a baby," she confirmed, and watched his face transform with joy so pure it made her throat tight with emotion. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing, then set her down carefully as if she might break. "A baby, our baby. When?" "Late spring or early summer, I think. Maybe June or July." Jessie's hands shook as he cupped her face, kissing her with a tenderness that made her melt. "I love you," he said against her lips. "I love you so much, Nora. Thank you for this. Thank you for everything." "I love you too," she whispered back. "More than I ever thought possible." That winter was harsh, with heavy snows that sometimes kept them confined to the cabin for days at a time. But Nora found she did not mind. Jessie was attentive to her needs, taking on the heaviest work without complaint, making sure she stayed warm and well fed, rubbing her back when it ached and her feet when they swelled. They spent long evenings planning for the baby, discussing names and making a cradle from wood Jessie carefully planed and sanded until it was smooth as silk. "If it is a boy, I want to name him Jacob, after my father," Nora said one evening as she sewed tiny clothes. "And if it is a girl?" Jessie asked. "I like Emma," Nora said. "It was my mother's middle name." "Emma Dalton," Jessie tested the name. "It sounds perfect." Spring arrived late that year, snow lingering into April before finally surrendering to warmer weather. As the land greened and the creek swelled with snowmelt, Nora's belly swelled too, growing round and tight with the life inside her. Jessie was endlessly fascinated by the changes in her body, talking to the baby through her skin, feeling the kicks and movements with wonder on his face. "Strong," he would say when the baby kicked particularly hard. "Going to be a strong one like the mother." Nora felt strong, despite the discomforts of late pregnancy. She felt powerful and capable and deeply content. This was what she had been meant for, she thought. Not just to be a rancher's wife, but to be Jessie's partner in building a life, in creating a family, in making something meaningful and good in this hard country. On a warm June evening when the air smelled of rain and new grass, Nora felt the first contractions. Jessie, who had been watching her like a hawk for weeks, immediately sprang into action, riding to fetch Mrs. Henderson, who had experience with birthing, and Dr. Miller from Platteville, who Jessie had put on notice weeks earlier. The labor was long and hard, lasting through the night and into the next day. Jessie refused to leave despite Mrs. Henderson's suggestion that he wait outside. He held Nora's hand, wiped her face with cool cloths, whispered encouragement and love through every contraction. When Nora was certain she could not endure another moment, when she was ready to give up entirely, Jessie looked into her eyes and said firmly, "You can do this. You are the strongest person I know. Just a little longer, my love. Just a little longer." And she believed him, drew strength from his faith in her, and pushed through the final agonizing minutes until suddenly, blessedly, she heard the sharp cry of a newborn baby. "A boy," Dr. Miller announced, placing the squalling infant on Nora's chest. "A healthy, strong boy." Nora looked down at her son, her and Jessie's son, and felt her heart expand impossibly large. He was perfect, tiny and red-faced and furious at being evicted from his warm home, but perfect nonetheless. She looked up at Jesse and saw tears streaming down his face unchecked. "Jacob," she said softly. "Jacob Daniel Dalton." Jesse's breath caught at the inclusion of his brother's name. "Are you certain?" "I am certain," Nora said. "Your brother should be honored too. This is a child of both our histories, both our families." Jesse leaned down and kissed her forehead, then gently touched one finger to his son's tiny hand. Jacob immediately grasped it with surprising strength, and Jesse laughed through his tears. "Hello, Jacob," he whispered. "Welcome to the world, son. You are so loved already." The months that followed were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Jacob proved to be a demanding baby, nursing frequently and sleeping only in short bursts. Nora moved through her days in a fog of fatigue, but every time she looked at her son or saw Jesse cradling the baby with infinite gentleness, her exhaustion seemed worthwhile. Jesse was a devoted father from the very beginning. He took over as many of Nora's other chores as he could manage, insisting she rest when the baby slept. He walked the floor with Jacob during the nights when the baby would not settle, singing in that beautiful voice of his until the infant calmed. He changed diapers and heated bottles of expressed milk when Nora needed a break, performing every task with the same careful competence he brought to working cattle or building fences. "You are a natural at this," Nora told him one evening as she watched him rock their son to sleep. "I love him," Jesse said simply, as if that explained everything. And perhaps it did. By the time Jacob was 6 months old, they had settled into a rhythm that worked for their growing family. Nora managed the household and cared for Jacob, while Jesse handled the outside work with help from Tommy Wilson. And another hand they had hired named Pete, a taciturn older man who proved reliable and skilled with cattle. The ranch was prospering. Their herd had grown significantly, the cattle thriving on their good grazing land. They had built the addition to the cabin that Jesse had mentioned that first night, creating more storage and a small nursery for Jacob. Life felt full and rich and good. One evening in late fall, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset while Jacob dozed in Nora's arms, Jesse said quietly, "Sometimes I think about that day outside the bank. How easily you could have said no, could have walked away from a crazy stranger with an improbable offer. And I wonder what my life would be like now if you had." Nora shifted the baby to one arm so she could take Jesse's hand with the other. "I wonder too sometimes. But then I realized that saying yes to you was the least crazy thing I could have done. You offered me hope when I had none. You offered me partnership when I was alone. You offered me a chance at love when I thought I would have to settle for mere survival. Of course I said yes. How could I not?" "I thought I was the one offering you something," Jesse said, raising her hand to his lips. "But you gave me so much more. You gave me a home, a family, a reason to stop drifting and put down roots. You gave me purpose and joy. I was half alive before I met you, Nora. You made me whole." She leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his shoulder, listening to his heartbeat that had become as familiar as her own. "We made each other whole," she corrected softly. "That is what love does." The years that followed brought their share of challenges. There were hard winters and dry summers, cattle prices that fluctuated wildly, the constant struggle to expand while remaining solvent. But there were triumphs too. They built the permanent house Jesse had envisioned, a spacious 2-story home near the creek with enough bedrooms for a large family, and a library where Nora's books lined the shelves. They acquired more land, expanding their holdings until the Dalton Ranch was one of the most successful operations in northern Colorado. They hired more hands and built the bunkhouse Jesse had planned, creating employment for men who needed it, and their family grew. When Jacob was 2, Nora gave birth to a daughter they named Emma Rose, who had her mother's hazel eyes and her father's dimples. 2 years after that came another boy, Thomas Jesse, who was quieter than his siblings but watchful and clever. And finally, when Nora was 32 and Jesse 39, came another daughter, Sarah Marie, who arrived early and tiny but proved to be a fighter from her first breath. Jesse proved to be as devoted to all their children as he had been to Jacob. He taught them to ride almost before they could walk, showed them how to read the sky for weather and the land for water, passed on the skills he had learned in his years of wandering. But he also taught them gentleness and integrity, the importance of keeping one's word and treating others with respect. Nora watched her husband with their children and fell more deeply in love with him every year. The passion between them never faded. Even with 4 children and the endless work of the ranch, they made time for each other, for stolen kisses in the barn and long talks on the porch after the children were asleep. They were partners in every sense, making decisions together, supporting each other through difficulties, celebrating victories as a team. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jesse surprised Nora by taking her back to Platteville for a rare night away from the ranch and the children, who were left in the capable care of Mrs. Henderson and her daughter. He had reserved a room at the Platteville house, the same hotel where they had first talked about marriage, and arranged for dinner at the finest restaurant in town. "You are spoiling me," Nora protested as she dressed in the new gown he had bought her, a beautiful deep green silk that made her feel elegant and young. "You deserve to be spoiled," Jesse said, watching her with appreciation. "You work harder than anyone I know, Nora. You deserve a night to be pampered." Over dinner, they talked about everything and nothing, enjoying the rare luxury of uninterrupted conversation. Jesse reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her palm. "I have been thinking," he said, "about that day 10 years ago when I saw you come out of the bank, about how I made that crazy, impulsive decision to approach you. It was the biggest risk I have ever taken, walking up to a stranger and proposing marriage. And the best decision you ever made." Nora teased. "The best decision I ever made," Jesse confirmed seriously. "But also the most terrifying. Because what if you had said no? What if you had thought I was insane or dangerous? What if I had never found the courage to speak to you at all? I would have missed everything. Our life together, our children, this profound happiness that I feel every single day, all of it hung on that one moment of courage." Nora felt tears prick her eyes. "I am glad you found that courage, and I am glad I found the courage to say yes, to trust a stranger with my future. We took a leap of faith together, Jesse, and we built something beautiful." "We did," he agreed. "And we are not done building yet. There are years ahead of us still, children to raise, grandchildren to spoil someday, dreams we have not even imagined yet. I cannot wait to live all of it with you." That night, in the hotel room where so much had begun, they made love with the unhurried thoroughness of long familiarity combined with undimmed passion. Afterward, Nora lay in Jesse's arms and thought about the miraculous chain of events that had brought them together. A drought that destroyed her crops, a debt she could not pay, a stranger who heard her conversation and made an extraordinary offer, a torn piece of paper and a promise of partnership. It all seemed like fate somehow, like they had been meant to find each other despite the improbable circumstances. But Nora knew it was more than fate. It was choice. Jesse had chosen to approach her, to offer help, to take a chance on a stranger. She had chosen to accept, to trust, to open her heart to possibility. And every day since, they had chosen each other again and again, through difficulties and joys, through the mundane and the extraordinary. That was the real secret of their success, Nora thought. Not fate or luck or even love alone, but the daily choice to honor their partnership, to treat each other with respect and kindness, to work together towards shared goals. Love was not just a feeling but an action, a commitment renewed with every sunrise. The years continued to pass in the way that years do, gathering speed as children grew and life became full and complex. Jacob grew into a serious young man who loved the ranch and showed every sign of taking it over someday. Emma proved to have her mother's head for numbers and became essential to managing the ranch's finances. Thomas discovered a talent for working with horses and began breeding them, creating a profitable sideline to their cattle operation. And Sarah, the baby, revealed a fierce intelligence that led Nora to dream of sending her to college someday, something almost unheard of for young women, but increasingly possible in the changing world of the 1890s. Jessie and Nora navigated the challenges of parenting together, presenting a united front when discipline was needed, but also encouraging their children's individual passions and talents. They expanded the library, hired tutors to supplement the education available at the small schoolhouse in Platteville, and made it clear that all 4 children, daughters as well as sons, would have opportunities to build meaningful lives. When Jacob turned 18 in the summer of 1901, Jessie took him aside for a serious conversation about the future of the ranch. Nora watched from the porch as father and son walked together along the creek, their heads bent in earnest discussion. When they returned an hour later, both wore expressions of satisfaction. "We have a plan," Jessie announced, putting his arm around Nora's waist. "Jacob will gradually take over more of the day-to-day operations, learning everything he needs to know to run this place. In 5 years, when he is ready, we will make him a full partner. And in 10 years, when your mother and I are old and gray, we will step back and let him take the lead while we enjoy being grandparents and offering advice that he will probably ignore." Nora laughed and hugged her son. "That sounds like an excellent plan. Though I dispute the old and gray part, we are not even 50 yet." "Speak for yourself," Jessie said with mock indignation. "I will be 51 next month," but age was kind to both of them. Jessie's dark hair might have threads of silver at the temples, and Nora might have laugh lines around her eyes, but they were both still strong and healthy, still vital and active. They looked forward to the next phase of their lives with anticipation rather than dread. True to their plan, they gradually handed over more responsibility to Jacob while still remaining involved in major decisions. It was a delicate balance, giving their son autonomy while offering the benefit of their experience, but they navigated it successfully. Emma married a young banker from Greeley, a smart, principled man who Jessie thoroughly vetted before giving his blessing. Thomas bought land adjacent to theirs and started his own horse ranch, while Sarah shocked everyone by announcing her intention to attend the University of Colorado in Boulder to study mathematics. "Are you certain?" Nora asked her youngest daughter, though pride shone in her eyes. "It will not be easy, being one of the few women in such a program." "I am certain," Sarah said firmly, sounding so much like Nora herself that Jessie smiled. "You taught me that I can do anything I set my mind to, Mama. Now I am going to prove it." On a warm June evening in 1907, as Nora and Jessie sat on the porch of the big house watching the sun set over land they had built together, Jessie said quietly, "25 years. Can you believe it has been 25 years since that day outside the bank?" Nora leaned her head on his shoulder, marveling at how well they still fit together after all this time. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime. Both are true, I suppose." "You ever regret it?" Jessie asked. "Marrying a stranger on faith, taking such a wild risk?" "Never," Nora said firmly. Not for a single moment. You are the best decision I ever made, Jesse Dalton. The best thing that ever happened to me. The second best thing, Jesse corrected, gesturing toward the house where the sounds of their grandchildren playing drifted through the open windows. Emma's twins, 3-year-old boys who visited often and who adored their grandfather with fierce devotion. All right, the second best thing, Nora conceded with a laugh. After the family we built together. Jesse pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. I love you, Nora. More today than yesterday, more tomorrow than today. That is my truth and always will be. I love you too, Nora whispered. My partner, my best friend, my heart. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge. Two people who had taken a chance on each other a quarter-century ago and built a love that had only deepened with time. The ranch stretched around them, prosperous and beautiful, a testament to their hard work and partnership. Their children were happy and successful, pursuing lives that honored the values Nora and Jesse had instilled in them. And somewhere in the house behind them, their grandchildren laughed and played, carrying forward the legacy of the family that had begun with a torn piece of paper and a proposal from a stranger. Nora thought about that young woman she had been, standing outside the bank with a foreclosure notice in her pocket and no hope in her heart. She thought about Jesse, a drifter with money saved and a dream of settling down, taking a chance on a woman he did not know because he saw strength in her bearing and dignity in her sorrow. She thought about all the moments between then and now, the challenges overcome and the joys celebrated, the children raised and the love that grew stronger every year. It had started with a debt. $300 that seemed like an insurmountable fortune to a desperate young woman. Jesse had torn up that debt and offered something infinitely more valuable in its place: partnership, respect, the promise of a shared future. And Nora had taken that leap of faith, trusting a stranger with her life and her heart. Best decision she ever made, she thought again, watching the stars multiply in the darkening sky. The years continued their steady march forward. Jacob married a sweet-natured girl from Denver and brought her to the ranch, where she fit into the family with surprising ease. They gave Nora and Jesse more grandchildren, 4 in total, who filled the big house with laughter and chaos during frequent visits. Emma had another set of twins, girls this time, and Thomas married late but happily, to a woman who shared his passion for horses. Only Sarah remained single, focused on her studies, and then her career as a mathematics professor, though she came home often and always seemed content with her choices. Nora and Jesse stepped fully back from the ranch operations when Jesse turned 65, handing over the reins to Jacob with confidence. They remained active and involved, offering advice when asked and helping with grandchildren, but they also finally had time for themselves. They traveled, visiting San Francisco and even venturing as far as New York City, marveling at how much the country had changed since they were young. But they always returned to Colorado, to the ranch, to the land that held their history and their hearts. On a spring morning in 1920, Nora woke to find Jesse already awake beside her, watching her with the same intense attention he had given her for nearly 4 decades. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, reaching up to smooth a lock of silver hair off his forehead. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Jesse said simply, "to have found you, to have lived this life with you, to wake up every morning for 38 years and see your face beside me. It is more than I ever dreamed possible. That day I approached a desperate young woman outside a bank and made an outrageous proposal." "Not so outrageous," Nora said, her eyes crinkling with affection. "It worked out rather well, I think." "Rather well," Jesse agreed, pulling her into his arms. though those words do not begin to capture what we have built together. This family, this legacy, this love that has sustained me through every day of my adult life. You are my everything, Nora Dalton. You always have been. They made love slowly, tenderly, with the easy familiarity and deep affection of a lifetime together. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, talking about their plans for the day, the grandchildren who would visit that afternoon, the letter from Sarah about her latest mathematical research that neither of them fully understood, but both were immensely proud of anyway. It was an ordinary morning in an extraordinary life, and Nora felt gratitude swell in her chest, so large it almost hurt. For this man, for this family, for every choice and chance that had brought them to this moment. As they aged into their 70s, and then their 80s, Nora and Jesse remained devoted to each other and active in their families' lives. They watched their grandchildren grow and begin having children of their own, creating a fourth generation of Daltons on the Colorado land that Jesse and Nora had built together. They celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, mourned losses when friends and family members passed, and continued to find joy in simple things. Sunrises over the mountains, the smell of coffee, the feeling of each other's hand. On their 50th wedding anniversary in 1932, the family organized a huge celebration at the ranch. Over 100 people attended, including children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, neighbors, friends, and business associates. There were speeches and toasts, laughter and tears, stories told about Jesse and Nora that made the couple blush and laugh in equal measure. Jacob stood up to offer a toast, and the crowd quieted to listen. "My parents," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "built something remarkable. Not just this ranch, though that is impressive enough. Not just this family, though we are blessed to be part of it. They built a partnership based on respect, trust, and love that has been an example to all of us. They took a chance on each other when they were little more than strangers, and they chose each other every day for 50 years. That kind of love, that kind of commitment, is rare and precious. I am honored to be their son, and I know everyone here is honored to know them. To Jesse and Nora Dalton, may they have many more years together." The crowd raised their glasses and cheered. Nora, sitting beside Jesse with his hand clasped firmly in hers, felt tears stream down her weathered cheeks. She looked at her husband, her partner of 5 decades, and saw matching tears in his eyes. 50 years, she said softly, just for him. "Can you believe it?" "I can believe it," Jesse said, raising her hand to his lips as he had done countless times over the years. "Because every single one of those years, every day and hour, has been a gift I treasured, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat, Nora. Every single moment, good and bad, because it was all with you." "So would I," Nora whispered. "I would choose you again and again, Jesse Dalton. Forever." They lived 7 more years together after that golden anniversary. Years that were gentler and slower, but still full of love and purpose. They spent their days watching the ranch thrive under Jacob's capable leadership, delighting in great-grandchildren who called them Grandma Nora and Grandpa Jesse, and enjoying the simple pleasure of each other's company. Jesse passed first, on a quiet autumn morning in 1939 when he was 87 years old. He died peacefully in his sleep with Nora beside him, his hand in hers as it had been for 57 years. Nora held him and wept, feeling as though half her soul had been torn away, but also grateful beyond measure for the extraordinary life they had shared. She lived 3 more years without him, surrounded by family who loved her and honored Jesse's memory. She told her grandchildren and great-grandchildren stories about their grandfather, about the brave, generous man who had torn up a debt and proposed marriage to a stranger, who had built a life and a legacy through hard work and unwavering integrity. She made sure they understood that love was not just something you felt, but something you did, every single day, through actions large and small. On a June evening in 1942, Nora sat on the porch of the big house for the last time, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of rose and gold. She was 93 years old, surrounded by 4 generations of descendants, and she felt tired but utterly content. She had lived a full life, a good life, a life richer than she ever could have imagined that desperate day outside the bank when a stranger approached her with an impossible offer. She closed her eyes and saw Jesse's face as it had been that first day, serious and hopeful and kind. She heard his voice saying, "Marry me instead," and felt again the wild flutter of hope and fear that had filled her heart. She remembered every kiss, every laugh, every moment of joy and sorrow they had shared. And she knew with absolute certainty that she was ready to join him, to close the circle of their love. Nora Thompson Dalton passed peacefully in her sleep that night, her hand resting over her heart where she wore the simple gold wedding band Jesse had placed there 57 years before. She was buried beside her husband on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, under cottonwood trees that rustled in the breeze like whispered conversations. At the funeral, Jacob spoke again about his parents, about the extraordinary love story that had begun with a debt and a torn piece of paper. "They taught us," he said, "that love is a choice we make every day. That partnership means respecting each other as equals. That courage sometimes means taking a chance on someone unknown. They built something that will last for generations, not just this ranch but the values they lived by, the example they set. We are all better for having known them. We are all blessed to carry forward their legacy." The ranch continued to thrive for decades more, passed down through the Dalton family from generation to generation. The story of how it all began became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. The big house remained standing, preserved and cherished, with Nora's book still lining the library shelves and Jesse's rocking chair still sitting on the porch. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun set over the mountains in shades of rose and gold, descendants of Jesse and Nora would sit on that porch and swear they could feel something in the air, a presence of love so strong it had transcended even death. They would think about the cowboy who had torn up a debt, and the young woman who had taken a chance on a stranger, about the partnership they had built, and the love that had sustained them through 57 years together. It was a story about courage and trust, about taking chances and making choices, about building something meaningful through hard work and unwavering commitment. But most of all, it was a love story, simple and true, that began with $300 owed to a bank and grew into a legacy that would last forever. Nora had owed $300. Jesse had torn up the paper and said, "Marry me instead." And from that impossible beginning, they had created something extraordinary. A life, a family, a love that time itself could not diminish. It was, everyone agreed, the best deal either of them had ever made.